In this video, we're going to be discussing about some of the important environment movements in India. The very first environment movement, as we know, happened in India was in 1730. If you look at this painting, you might get the whole idea of this particular movement called the Bishnoi movement. Amid an arid region, there is a lush forest and there are people trying to hug the trees in order to stop logging of the trees. There are some people who are dead and there are some people who are trying to log the trees. Before we move further into the movement, let's see who are these Bishnois and why are they called so. The Bishnoi faith is a religious offshoot of Hinduism. It is founded on 29 principles, and almost all of these principles are about promoting environmental stewardship and conserving nature. They forbid harming of trees and animals. This sect of religion was founded by Guru Maharaj Jambaji in 1485 in Marwar desert region of western Rajasthan. The founder of this sect, Jambaji, he recognized the importance of trees, animals and birds. He banned harming any of these live units in the ecosystem. Bishnois are famous for cultivating lush vegetation, caring for animals and collecting drinkable water amid the arid region of western Rajasthan. Now, what exactly led to this movement of environmental preservation? In 1730, the Maharaja of Jodhpur wanted to build a new palace and he sent his soldiers to gather wood from the forest region near the village of Khejarli, where Bishnoi villagers had helped foster an abundance of khejri trees. Khejri trees are particularly important to the ecosystem of the region. More details of these particular trees and their current state have been uploaded in the Module 4. Please watch and read on this particular tree. When the king's men began to log the trees, the Bishnois protested but were ignored by the soldiers. Amrita Devi, one of the villagers, she took a more stern action against the logging of these khejri trees. She also encouraged other villagers to help her prevent this kind of a deforestation. Many villagers from that village and around the villages came together and started hugging the khejri trees in order to prevent the logging. But almost 363 Bishnoi villages were killed. But when the king of Jodhpur heard about this, he rushed to the village and apologized. He ordered the soldiers to cease logging operation immediately. Soon afterwards, Maharaja designated the Bishnoi state as a protected area, forbidding harm to trees and animals of the region. A number of khejri trees are planted around the area in the memory of the 363 villagers who died while trying to protect the forest. This area, even today, is considerably lush and green compared to the arid region around it. This particular movement became an inspiration for the Chipko movement, which happened much later in India. Now we're going to talk about the Chipko movement. This was a non-violent agitation that happened in 1973. It was aimed at the protection and conservation of trees, with collective mobilization of women for the cause of preserving forests. Now, this movement originated in Uttar Pradesh's Chamoli district, which is currently in the state of Uttarakhand, in 1973. It also spilled onto other states in northern India. Chipko, it comes from the word embrace, as the villagers hugged the trees and encircled them to prevent being logged. Now, the reasons for such a movement to arise are the following. After the 1963 Indo-China border conflict, Uttar Pradesh witnessed a lot of infrastructure developmental process. For this infrastructure development process, a lot of trees were logged. It also attracted many foreign logging companies. They were eyeing the state's vast forest resources, but the villages had to rely on these forest resources for their livelihood. In 1970, widespread floods affected the area, which the local people said was because of the mismanagement and unscientific deforestation that occurred during the decade. At the same time, where the foreign logging companies were allowed to collect forest resources in the name of infrastructure development, the forest dwellers and the community living around the forest were not allowed to collect even modicum amount of forest resources from the forest. This also angered the people. Environmentalist and Gandhian social activist Chandi Prasad Bhatt, who was the founder of Dashuli Gram Swarajya Sangh, led the first Chipko movement near the village of Mandal in 1973. They tried to appeal to the government to stop the logging by large-scale companies, but none of their appeals were heard. And that's when Bhatt led a group of villagers into the forest and embraced the trees to prevent the logging. After many days of agitation, the government cancelled the company's logging permit. The Chipko movement also stands out as an eco-feminist movement. It was the women who were directly affected by the kind of deforestation policies the government followed at that point of time. They were also mobilized for the protection of forests under this movement. Hence, it is being called an eco-feminist movement. Another famous leader who took up the cause of Chipko movement was Sundarlal Bahuguna. He was already a nationally known figure, and he spent his life persuading, educating the villagers to protest against the destruction of the forest and Himalayan mountains. With his involvement, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi banned cutting of trees for 15 years in 1980. Bahuguna is best remembered for the slogan, "Ecology is the permanent economy." The third movement we are going to talk about is the Apiko movement. It is actually the South Indian version of the Chipko movement. The word Apiko, meaning embrace, comes from Kannada. This movement is started by Pandurang Hegde, as you can see in the picture on the right side. It started in September 1983 at Salkani, northern Karnataka. It spread to Kodagu, Wayanad in Kerala, and parts of Tamil Nadu. The causes for the movement. It started in Uttara Kannada district of Karnataka. In the 1950s, this particular region saw a lot of infrastructure development projects, power projects that are dams, paper mills, plywood factories, etc., which caused large-scale deforestation and displacement of people. The forest cover was reduced to 1/4 in merely 30 years. Also, the natural forest and habitation and the vegetation was replaced by teak and eucalyptus trees, which also caused groundwater depletion. The infrastructure development policy exploited the resources for the sake of the rich, and the poor people living in and around the forest, relying on the forest resources, were left unheard. These two particular reasons gave rise to the Apiko movement. The objectives of the movement were to save the remaining tropical forest in Western Ghats, to make an attempt to restore the greenery to the denuded areas, to propagate the idea of rational utilization in order to reduce the pressure on forest resources. They don't talk about completely stopping any kind of activities in the forest, but rather utilizing the forest resources in a rational manner. Some of their important slogans are Upsu, that is to save, Bilesu, that is to grow, and Bilasu, that is the rational use. These three particular words form the most important slogan of this particular movement. Now, the methods they followed in these movements were foot marches in the interior forest, slideshows, folk dance, street plays, and so on, in order to raise awareness of what was happening in these forests. The second area of apical movement work is to promote afforestation on denuded lands, that is the process of regeneration in barren common land. The third major area of activity in the apical movement is related to rational use of the ecosphere through introducing alternate energy resources to reduce pressure on the forests. The activists have constructed 2,000 fuel-efficient chulas, which save fuel wood consumption by almost 40%. The fourth important agitation is the Chaliyar agitation. It happened in the northern Kerala district of Malappuram and Calicut. The Chaliyar river was once a very lush, clean river, but by 1960s, many industries propped up in and around the banks of the river. One of the most important one was Gwalior rayons, currently known as the Grasim Industries. People in villages like Mavur, Varakadu, Variyur and Arikodu on both sides of the river suffered with toxic air and water. From 1965 itself, a lot of unorganized protests started about this kind of pollution which made the lives of people miserable. K. Chatuni, EKK Mohammed were the early leaders of these unorganized protests. But even after a decade, not many things turned in the favor of the villagers who were living on the banks of Chaliyar. They made many appeals to the government, but instead, in 1972, the government gave the company permission to renovate the unit or have their production even in a larger scale. Following this, the agitations became more aggressive and the government started negotiations which led to a temporary settlement in 1974. As part of this settlement, it was decided to measure water and air pollution levels regularly, and if that is above the levels, the company was going to be accountable. As a result of this agreement, known as the Ramanila Pact, the Kerala State Pollution Control Board was set up in 1974. It was one of the first such bodies to come up in the country. But even after 3 decades later, that was in 1998, the villagers still had to do a lot of work. 8,000 villagers marched to the factory gates demanding its immediate closure in 1998. They also pulled down a bunt that was built in the river of Elamaram to enable the factory to take unpolluted water upstream for its use. So the factory was taking unpolluted water from the river, but was discharging a lot of its effluents into the river and into the air, which killed a lot of the fish wealth in the river. The massive movements in 1998 grabbed national attention, and many activists from all parts of the country, like Writer Arundhati Roy, came to Mavur to join hands in the struggle of the people. At the same time, the technology used in the factory was old and there was pressure from all parts of the government and management to take urgent steps. The company either had to upgrade the technology that would ensure zero pollution level or close down completely. In 1998, a survey was conducted in the Warakadu village and it found out that during the period from 1993 to 1998, there were 245 cancer patients in that particular village alone. It was attributed to the toxic pollution which happened because of the activities of this industry. In 2000, the factory was closed down and it was relocated to Madhya Pradesh. Now, a struggle, it lasted almost 4 decades and it ended in 2000.